Hello, welcome to our next Workplace Ninjas Netherlands live Ask Us Anything. My name is Frans Oudendorp, and normally I'm hosting this session together with Ronny de Jong, but he's not available today, so I will host this session on my own. First, this is a live recording and will be available on YouTube afterwards. When it's available, we will announce it through our social channels. If you have any questions on this topic, feel free to ask the questions in the chat or go off mute and ask your questions. So don't hesitate and join the conversation. And today we have a very interesting topic, Teams calling, how to configure and how to secure it. For this topic, we've invited Sven Antonissen, technical lead from Meet Wortell, to tell us everything about this subject. Sven, welcome. We're pleased to have you. Please, can you introduce yourself shortly?
Okay, thanks, Frans. Thanks also for the introduction. My name is Sven Antonissen. I'm a Belgian guy, yeah, I'm glad to join Workplace Ninja Netherlands. I don't think that there is Workplace Ninjas in Belgium yet, but perhaps could be done.
Not yet, but we have several other community initiatives there.
Yeah, indeed. No, my job or my past or my history, what I did in the past is I was mainly focused on voice VoIP and PBXs and telecommunication in the large sense of the word. I also had a voice VoIP operator in Belgium, which I hosted for 3 or 4 years. And in 2014, I migrated myself to the Microsoft communications area, in which I provided assistance within Sky for Business, Link projects, and also integration with contact centers and so on. That is what I did. Yeah.
And today we will have a conversation and probably some interesting information and slides about Teams calling. But before heading into the specific topic, normally we start also with some statements. So that's true or false, and afterwards you can explain a little bit why false, why true, and so on.
Yeah.
When looking at the first statement I have, phone numbers are so 2000. We don't need numbers anymore. What? Is that true or false?
I think it's you can compare it with media consumption, Frans. Let me share quickly an image that I found. Can I also share it via the chat? Yeah, I'll share it online first. My statement is false. We still need numbers, and we can compare it with this image. We have several generations, and I think every generation has its way of communicating today. We can see this in media consumption as people are watching more online videos because you're young and hip and you want to you get your information from online sessions. Same applies for instance, millennials and boomers, where there's a larger consumption in broadcast television, for instance. You can also compare this with the need of telephony. Because a millennial, I'm not sure if you already made a call, for instance, to your children. The thing that I do, so when I would make a call to my children, first thing that they do is they would block the call and they would send a text message, "Hey, why did you call?" So there's definitely a difference in the way that people are handling communication, and more specific telecommunication. Also, older generations are used to making calls and so on. But that was the first question or first statement. My opinion, it should be false.
Yeah, when looking at thanks for that. When looking at another statement, I have a lot of statements. So let's pick a few of them. fixed telephony is more reliable than Teams calling?
That's what the operator tells you.
Yeah, in your opinion.
In my opinion, this is a marketing thing. So they are both as reliable, so they can be compared to each other.
Okay, and complex scenarios can be covered with Teams without third-party solutions.
That's a difficult one. It depends on what kind of on your definition of complexity.
Yeah,
so,
that's true. And I have another question, but maybe we can address that later on. If you have call centers and other advanced scenarios where with call queues and so on, can that be covered within Teams, or do I need some specific software on top of that?
If you would take a look into skill-based routing, wrap-up time, prefix-based routing, those things can be solved with contact center solutions, but not within Teams. Teams is just basic and group functionality, collaborative calling, which is obviously a nice feature. Also, the integration with Dynamics, which is popping up more in more recent times. That can also be compared with contact center, but I think the definition of contact center should also be taken into a question, Frans.
Yeah.
What is a contact center and why do we need a contact center? But that's another discussion.
Yeah, I agree with that. Last statement that I want to address. Already had a conversation about the phone numbers. When looking at Teams calling is just the transition mechanism for shifting workloads to cloud IP communication.
Yeah, but you have different ways of communicating, Frans. You have a synchronous way of communicating and an asynchronous way of communicating, which we would like to mention that, for instance, making a phone call or making a meeting is a synchronous way of communicating, and sending an email, sending a chat message, collaborating on a document even. However, collaborating on a document can also be a synchronous communication nowadays, because you can collaborate on Word and Excel documents and so on. But typically, it has been seen as an asynchronous way of communicating with each other. So I would type in something. There's still going to be a need of direct communications, and if it's going to be Teams, obviously. But on the other hand, we need to make sure that traditional ways of communicating can still be serviced and can still be can be reached.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for that one. When looking at Teams calling, can you give us a brief overview what Teams calling is regarding the configuration, the deployment that we probably have in environments, for example?
You can start quite easily. You can buy a license with Microsoft, and you can activate in the countries that they have. You can activate a calling plan, and this can be based upon international, national, domestic calls. You also have the feature of Operator Connect, in which some operators can connect their environment directly to the Teams of the customer, the tenant, the Office 365 Microsoft tenant, to the operator. The operator would make some kind of agreement or a contract in which you state that you would like to take some numbers. And that's quite easy, because you just need to sign an agreement and everything will be moved towards Teams. Another thing that you have is a more complex scenario, which is direct routing, or even a Skype for Business hybrid environment with Teams. Those scenarios can also be can also be used, and this allows you to migrate, for instance, a Skype for Business environment to Teams, taking into account that you also have phone numbers on premise and that you would like to migrate them to Teams. Those things are also possible. Same with contact centers and so on.
Do you have an overview of that in a picture or something?
I have an overview on contact centers.
Yeah, but probably when looking at the infra components that are needed from a Teams perspective, Teams calling perspective, how does it fit in an infrastructure? What is needed? What is critical, for example?
Yeah, that I can show you. Let me just share one slide.
Yeah, and in addition to that, what is critical, but also where is the maybe is that's the next one. Who is responsible for what?
Yeah, that I can also show. This is, for instance, Microsoft has 3 ways of creating contact centers. It's not relevant, but in this case, there's always a central architecture needed for direct routing, for instance. This allows us to connect the telco or the customer or any other telco. We connect it to the SBC, and the SBC is connected to Microsoft Teams. This is basically.
The SBC stands for?
Session Border Controller. I'm sorry. Session Border Controller can be compared with a firewall or a router, but then for voice over IP. In this case, we would route voice calls from the telco operator to Teams and so on. And in Teams, you have your environment over here in which you can connect users, phones, but also meeting rooms, for instance, can also be connected. But on the SBC, you can connect contact centers, but you can also connect PBXs, DECT networks, analog devices, everything which has a SIP trunk or a SIP connectivity can be connected using the SBC. So this is the most typical architecture that can exist. Within Teams, you can also expand them. For instance, if you have a site in Europe and a site in America, you can add those session border controllers. You can connect different telcos. You can make quite a large puzzle of all SBCs and all connectivities that are required, and connect them up to Teams, and Teams can route it, vice versa, depending on the most close. So the SBC needs to be quite close to the end user who would like to make the call because of latency. For instance, if you would place a session border control in the States and you would be in Europe and you would like to make a call, then it also needs to pass the Atlantic Ocean, which is not quite good for making voice calls.
There's some latency.
There's some latency between, indeed. Yeah. And to avoid that, the most optimal solution is to place that session border controller as close to the location of the end user.
And when looking at the picture, session border controller, and on the left there is a telco operator. Does it matter when consuming a phone number from Microsoft within the Teams environment, or delivering your own phone numbers from your own telco operator?
Doesn't matter, because what I want to show here is Microsoft offers 3 ways of connecting contact centers. One way is the connect model, in which contact centers can be connected using the session border controller. But if we would take a look into the extend model, over here, for instance, you can have a telco, which is Microsoft via calling plans, or an operator connect, an operator who is capable of delivering services using Operator Connect. And you also have direct routing. So you have 3 ways of connecting a phone number into your Teams tenant.
And when looking at the differences, direct routing and calling plans, for example, what are the main differences and what to choose when?
Direct routing will be used when you would have migration scenarios. For instance, if you would have your traditional PBX, some facility requirements are still delivered by those PBXs, like BAV or emergency or EHBO cases, where they have installed in the plant a phone on which a simple phone number can be dialed, like 911 or 112. Those kind of facilities still needs to be made available because they are described within business processes. The organization describes how an emergency call should be handled. And if you would take this phone away, then it also delivers a burden on how to change those processes so that people in the plant can make emergency calls without having an actual phone of the company. So this is also something that needs to be considered when migrating to Teams, for instance, and migrating phone numbers to Teams. If you would take a look in companies who are migrating using calling plans and operator connect, then you would see that the local requirement or the facility requirement of the PBX is no longer needed. They most often distantiate themselves from any facility requirement, and they're quite satisfied with just having phone numbers in Teams and making sure that that you can make and receive calls independent on your own location.
Regarding that, there is a question from Jeroen. What will be the advantage to use Operator Connect over direct routing delivered as a SaaS solution by third party? Is it only that you don't have to add a gateway in Teams?
That's one advantage. But in fact, Operator Connect has its specifications. It means that you cannot you have to be using that block of numbers. Route that to Teams. You cannot have facility phones and facility PBXs connected via MPLS, for instance. You certainly need to take a look into the service description of Operator Connect provided by that telco to see what kind of services that they can offer besides Operator Connect, because it's always living in both worlds, for instance, having the PBX still in place, or should you do the full migration of the PBX to Teams?
One question about that, but you already said if you have a PBX, then when going hybrid and so on, then we need Operator Connect. That is what you're saying?
If you would need a hybrid, then the migration part would be direct routing, Frans. So direct routing is the most obvious way of migrating PBXs and traditional functionalities and then moving them forward to Teams. If you have a Skype for Business environment, then you can also, most often you also have the session border controller in your topology. But you can also set or connect the hybrid environment of Skype for Business with Teams and move users from and to Teams.
Yeah, when looking in the old days, I have a PBX. I connected all my phones. I was on my own, was responsible for the operational of the PBX at that moment, or I had my telecom company that was hosting that one for me. When looking at Teams calling with direct routing with calling plans, who is responsible for which feature? So can I address everything to Microsoft, or do I have to do things on my own, for example?
Let me share the service management framework of Microsoft. This is the responsibility of Microsoft, which is the Office 365 service, the infrastructure, and so on. And Microsoft is always stating that the network and the endpoints are the responsibility of the customer. Where you have to be, you need to make sure that your quality of service is arranged, that you have an MPLS, that you would manage your endpoints, like headsets, desktop phones, also computers. They are the responsibility of the customer or the partner of the customer in combination with the customer that can deliver that service and makes the can add some monitoring because you also want to secure it. That's the responsibility of the customer and the partner of the customer. Microsoft itself is just responsible of maintaining the Teams environment and making sure that the Teams environment is up and running and building the bridges.
Yeah, and we have also service providers that they are in between the customer and the Microsoft responsibility, I think.
Yeah, indeed. As you can see, you have 3 blocks. You have a network block, which is typically delivered by a service provider or can be done by the customer themselves. And then the endpoint can be managed by the customer themselves or also via a service partner who is capable of delivering that kind of service.
When looking at the responsibility, the infra components, and we already talked about cloud, but can I also use it a hybrid way? You also mentioned that already, but do I also have the option for a fully on-prem environment, for example?
A full on-prem environment is not existing. What you do have is survivable branch appliance in Teams nowadays. So what you can do is you can have a device, session border controller with a chipset inside, and that chipset can support the local branch when internet connectivity has failed, for instance. But as you know, most telcos are still moving from analog and ISDN towards SIP trunks. So if the data connectivity is lost, then most often the SIP trunk will also be lost. You need to make some disaster recovery plans and high availability plans, and to make sure that the survivable branch appliance does have its function.
Yeah, when you talked about calling plans, about direct routing, SIP trunks, you already mentioned a little bit, but what are the main differences between a calling plan and a SIP trunk / direct routing? Why should I? We both have made the choice for our company to have some things around the calling plans, but why should I use direct routing instead of calling plans? Is that only money? Are there other benefits?
Money is one, so financial. It costs quite a lot to have 200 users with calling plans on what is it? You have €5, €10, and €20 a month for calling plans.
I think so. Yeah.
You would generate a pool of minutes that you can consume upon your colleagues. But it's prepaid in advance, so every month those credits will be renewed. But the things that you don't consume, you would still need to pay for it. However, SIP trunks can be provided with specific companies in a prepaid or postpaid model. It's how you're used to having it built via the traditional phone lines, but in most common cases, it's definitely financial financial point.
Yeah, it's not directly related to an on-prem phone number that's based in the Netherlands or in Belgium or anything other. Also, Microsoft can deliver local phone numbers.
Of course, but not in all countries. I think there are. You need to check the website of Microsoft. They have a specific amount of countries that they provide services to. But for instance, for countries like, let's mention Russia, France.
Yeah.
Or China, they have strict regulations on what kind of numbers can be connected to session border controllers or can even be connected to the internet. Because in Belgium or Netherlands, you also have operators who don't like to route phone calls over the internet to a session border controller which is hosted in Azure, for instance. Because the session border controller in Azure will be hosted in Amsterdam. And operators are mentioning that, no, we don't like to route those phone numbers to Amsterdam because of GDPR legislation and also data protection.
Other question regarding integration. We already mentioned calling plans, direct routing, but we also have audio conferencing. When we have a meeting, you can dial in. Is there any integration with Teams calling within audio conferencing, for example?
You can have nowadays. So direct routing can also be used for connecting phone numbers to meeting room equipment. But don't forget, when activating an audio conference license, I believe you have 120 minutes included from Microsoft. So you can make outbound calls during meetings when having an audio conference license. Is a direct number required, Frans? That's also a good question. Because in old days, you had this spider phone, which was installed on the meeting table, on a meeting room. And this one would have a phone number. But if you would send out a Teams meeting by default with an audio conference license, there's also a number published. I think it's how many countries are included? Did you count them?
Too many.
Too many. Yeah, but indeed. So why would you need a phone number directly connected to a meeting room or audio conferencing equipment?
I don't know, but in the past, that's used a lot, so to say. So, and probably there are customers that want to use that. So that's the reason for that question. Regarding the calling plans again, and that's 120 minutes. Like a mobile phone charger, you have a few minutes, 120 minutes, and when you do not consume them, you already pay them. So that's lost. But there's also a difference within countries, I think.
Yes, of course.
For the money. So I have different calling plans per country.
Yeah.
When I am a big organization and I'm in multiple countries, so that could be a challenge.
Could be definitely a challenge because the cost per minute, for instance, for a call is different. Would even be would be different. For instance, if you would like to make a call to an ocean-going vessel, it would cost you more than you would make a call to the United States, for instance, or to the Netherlands. You also have operators who are quite flexible on those tariff plans. But yeah, it's definitely something to take into consideration. Also with split billing, how can you make sure that if you would like to make a call for a user that is hosted in Mexico, how can you internally split that bill? How can you make sure that the right amount of calling minutes are invoiced to each other and so on.
Yeah, so also from a billing perspective, you need the telco operators in the countries that are billing you the cost of the running phone costs, so to say.
Yeah, indeed.
So that could be much if you have a large organization and you are operating in multiple countries. Okay. When looking at the security part of Microsoft Teams calling specific, you already showed us who is responsible. So Microsoft is responsible for the team service only. But if I have a session border controller and all the other things that are needed, like a zip trunk and so on, what do I need to make that a secure environment?
Yeah, by default, if you have a session border controller, you would be needing to connect that to the internet. Why, Frans?
Yeah, probably you have a phone number.
No, because Teams is an online service.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, so the session border controller needs to be connected to the internet to have the connectivity with Teams established. So this means you need to have a fixed IP, configure that to the session border controller, but also make sure that if you would connect the session border controller to the internet, you also would create a security, security breach, no, but a potential security issue. You can have a router connected to the internet, but by default, the router is not secured. You can route inbound packages and outbound packages. You can NAT them, but same applies for a session border controller. If you don't secure the SIP communication well enough, voice hacking will be taking place. What kind of attacks do you know, Frans?
There are different attacks, but DDoS can be one of them.
DDoS, yeah. And what do you think, or how do you think that a DDoS attack on a phone system would look like?
Yeah, good question. Don't know.
DDoS on a phone is in fact making the phone ring as often as possible with different kind of phone numbers. So you cannot block them, for instance. So when you have a phone number and you would like to DDoS that mobile phone of you, you just need to send a lot of calls every 2-3 minutes, detect when Frans has taken up and disconnected the call and just relaunch a new call. That can be a DDoS in voice.
Yeah, but also DDoS on the session border controller. If that has a public IP, I can fake that one as also.
Yeah, that's also similar. But what DDoS can also do is prevent the load of the systems. So you need to block them, or you need to process them, or just don't process them at all. Depends on how you would like to make your service available wide or not. But it's definitely something to take into consideration. The same with eavesdropping. So you have a phone system, you put it online, and as soon as somebody has connectivity with an internet router or makes it routes it via their systems, by default, you just need to sniff the packages, capture the packages, and put it in Wireshark, for instance, and then you can listen in. But what Microsoft requires is to have an encrypted connectivity as well for signaling as for voice. So that connectivity is still secured. But in traditional PBXs or cloud phone systems, they don't apply those kind of encryption layers. which also gives the opportunity of other people to barge in and listen in on everything that you're saying.
Yeah, when having that, what can I do to secure the environment in an optimal way?
Don't build vacuum cleaners.
Okay.
Don't build vacuum cleaners in that sense that don't allow traffic from any IP worldwide. That's a basic principle for every security security configuration consideration, I believe. Just allow the IPs from Microsoft. They're quite well documented, especially for Teams calling. And then on the other hand, make sure that the connectivity with the SIP-trunk operator is also secured. Because on the one hand, you have the connectivity most commonly routed via the internet, but also on the internal side, within the operator, you can also request that they should apply TLS, for instance, or apply encryption on top of SIP signaling and RTP packages.
And what can I do with high availability? Microsoft has done it on their end, like the team service and so on. But on my end, customer responsibility, like the session border controller, a SIP-trunk, for example, and that sort of stuff. What things do I need to consider regarding high availability?
High availability can be because Teams or voice communication is always direct communication. So this means that when I would dial the number, I need to have a system which is operating and capable of understanding what kind of number am I dialing and where should I be routing it to. So either you can create high availability based upon different session border controls that are placed on the internet, within the network, within the customer environment, as long as the session border control, you can compare it with routers, Frans. You had BGP, for instance, and capable of detecting how what kind of number was being called or what kind of IP packages was being routed. This can also be used within session border controllers. You can have several session border controllers. You can have them redundant as a pair, where one box is being split geographically. So there are quite a lot of architectures possible. I believe that AudioCodes also has an ARM system, which is automatic routing mechanism, which detects if there is some latency on a specific session border controller, that it automatically reroutes it via another session border controller.
Yeah, is there but there are lots of things that can be covered. Is there something you can show from a demo environment, for example?
What would you like to see, Frans?
Yeah, tell me. Is there?
Let's see.
When I think when looking at the differences between a calling plan, direct routing, how does that appear? And we have seen that from an architecture perspective, but how does that look like within the Teams environment, for example?
Okay, let me show you.
And there are lots of I know that already. There are lots of policies that can be defined within Teams. There's also regarding calling plans, but also regarding direct routing. I can dial out with a specific number and so on. There are lots of things that can be implemented, but is that only user-based? Can that be handled with grips, for example? That sort of things.
Let me share. I've got an admin center of Teams open for my customer, but for instance, You have a user within Teams which has policies assigned, and based upon those policies, you can route calls internationally, nationally. You can have dialing plans. Dialing plans are the way that people can make calls. For instance, if you would like to make it possible that they can still use internal numbers, then you can create different dialing plans. Also, caller ID policies can be created. What kind of number should be sent by this user? You can create it as a service organization would always send out the service number, for instance, so that people who have missed a call would call back to a service number instead of a direct number, in which you can automatically route and receive calls based upon a group of people instead of an individual. That can be done. You can also have different calling policies, message policies, and nowadays you can also create policy packages in which you can combine different policies that have been created on a voice level, which can be assigned to, for instance, security groups or distribution groups or Office 365 groups, to easily distribute those policies to end users, for instance.
Yeah, and this is when I have the correct license, an M365 E5 or an audio license, then this is available in your environment, and you can configure that, giving users a specific number, specific policies, and so on. So a user gets a dial plan in the Teams client, so they can communicate over a phone number, for example.
Yeah. As you can see in the voice part of Teams, you have three options: phone numbers, which are calling plans. Then you have operator connect, and then you have direct routing. Those are the three methods of routing calls to your environment. With direct routing, you would have your session border controller, for instance, a GTT one, which is stating how many calls that you had, what the network effectiveness ratio was, and so on. And then for operators, you can have all operators in which you can activate, for instance, a contract with calls, or with Proximus, or with Verizon. Yeah, so this can be done quite easily. You can also select only for on the Netherlands, for instance.
And then everything is checked out. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the parties that are delivering Operator Connect in the Netherlands. Can be activated quite easily. You can also see that they can offer audio conferencing.
Yeah.
And if you would like to see what's going to be the service that they're offering, you can always click on Offer Details, which would open up a new site with specific information on that product. For calling plans or phone numbers, you can add phone numbers. You can buy them as soon as you have a calling plan license assigned. These services will be available. You can also port numbers with Microsoft for specific countries, like the Netherlands and like Belgium. You can also port numbers directly to Microsoft, in which they can offer the service for making and receiving calls.
What I saw in the Operator Connect environment, there are operators that are operating in different countries. So if you are in different countries, you can still stick on one operator, but using different phone numbers in different countries and that.
Yeah, indeed. So that's a large advantage because you only need to have one contract with one specific party, which can deliver services worldwide or in the specific countries that you would be seeing over here. Like OBS, Orange Business Services, can offer it in 51 countries. Proximus can do it in 13 countries. I thought I saw one with 140, like NTT. 142 countries.
From an admin perspective, do we have role-based access on this on this environment?
The role-based access is Teams admin and Teams admin only.
There's no differences between calling, meeting, and all the other functionality within Teams.
No, there's no differentiation. One thing that you can do, for instance, for call queues, you have, for instance, you can assign this or you can link it to. Let me check if I can see that. You can choose call answering can be linked upon channels in Teams. So this allows you as an owner of a team, for instance, to add and to remove people from that phone number. That's something that they have added since 1 year now, but you can also choose to manage it using distribution groups or security groups or Office 365 groups. And then, that's the only way that the Teams allows you to add and remove people from, for instance, call queues and phone numbers.
Yeah, nowadays everyone is using Teams, or if people and companies are moving into, then Teams is the way to go. Are there still customers stuck on Skype for Business? I saw there was something in the pane a few seconds ago, but do we have customers on Skype for Business still?
We do, and quite a lot. And we also have customers where we are going to re-implement Skype for Business files.
And why is that?
That's because they want to have their unified communications platform on premise. They specifically, ask to have those data and data sources within their premises. And that's most commonly the main reason.
Yeah, but there are still use cases to implement the Skype for Business.
Yeah.
Okay, great. One question regarding some old school things. When calling, I have on my when you call me on my mobile phone, I have the option to block that call and send an SMS that I'm late or that I'm not able to attend and so on. I know that is I think it's that's a few months or a few years ago that on my current home phone it was possible to accept that SMS text messages that was read it from the telco operator, and they read that SMS. Is that functionality that is available in Teams, for example?
Not in Teams, but you can build stuff like this because by default every phone number has the option to receive text messages or SMS messages. So I can still send a text message to your fixed line if you would have one. So,
no, I don't want them. But one question, Jeroen is saying that he has migrated a big company by the end of December last year from Skype to 2015 to Teams. You have done it already for a few customers, Sven. Is there one thing to learn on that migration? What should it be for you?
But Microsoft is quite, can change their methodologies and can change the platform as well, even with differences of 6 months. So that was quite a burden in the last 2-3 years, the changes that have been made in Teams, and to get up to speed with those kind of configurations and new PowerShell commandlets which are made available. That was quite a challenge, but I think nowadays that it has stabilized a bit more. But it's still changing. It's still there's still some movement in that environment.
Yeah, and the Teams environment is evolving. New features are coming in, new CMDlets, PowerShell CMDlets are coming in. PowerShell CMDlets are changing. That's what you're saying. But
Yeah.
is there also a thing when comparison, a feature comparison between Skype for Business and Teams, that's already done. Teams has all the functionality, and you can move without big impact, so to say.
Well, by default, I have this presentation. By default, Skype for Business is a unified communications platform, and Teams is an intelligent communications platform. I'm not sure if you know the difference.
Please explain.
Yeah, you have. Wait, let me share my screen. So a unified communication platform exists of these building blocks. By default, the PBX like Mitel or like Alcatel, they all have their presence, chat, audio call, video call, meetings, and voicemail. Typical Skype for Business stuff. Skype for Business was also a unified communications platform. And what Teams is doing is, in fact, adding. This was a block in 2017. Microsoft has a core vision to bring intelligent communications where they are putting together files, meetings, audio calls, video calls, Office apps, third-party integrations into a single hub for teamwork, which is Microsoft Teams. As in default, intelligent communications and what it is. So making the bridge between synchronous communication and asynchronous communication, putting them together within Teams, makes it as a one environment for the end user to make and receive their calls, but also work based upon several things that are made available.
Teams calling and the direct communication is part of a larger ecosystem. Where we can do a lot of more than we can do with only Skype for Business. That's what you say.
Yeah, let me show it. This is conversational AI, Frans. Building chatbots, was it in the past?
Yeah.
And those chatbots can be, also delivering some kind of way to communicate with each other based upon text. Next step will be giving those chatbots a voice. It's also available nowadays. First, there's a step in between, which is creating virtual assistants from those chatbots. We need to give them some way of artificial intelligence so that they can understand your language, understand your speech, and so on. But the next step is also available, neural text-to-speech. I'm not sure if you tested this out. It's quite. Let me send the link in the chat. It's quite. They can even speak dialect nowadays with text-to-speech engines.
Yeah, is that working optimal in nowadays?
It's becoming more and more.
Is that already limited on languages, or are they adding languages in the meantime?
I don't see. I'm not sure how many languages we have worldwide, Frans, but
too many.
Yeah, if you would take a look into this page that I pasted in my chat, then you can see the amount of languages that are made available. I can also share it over here.
Yeah, I will also share the link in the meeting notes afterwards.
Yeah, but you can have a differentiation between Dutch in Belgium and Dutch in the Netherlands, which is, for instance, Colette, Maarten or Fenna, which can be used. Or in Belgium, you have Arnold and Dana. They have a different tonality in their voice and also a different way of speaking out.
Yeah, so Teams calling is evolving into and not only calling in the direct way, but also calling text to speech, so I can receive it as an email, for example, or as a Teams message within the environment, and write it. So get a transcript of the things that are in that conversation.
Of course, same as when you would leave a voicemail, for instance, in Teams, then you would you would leave the message in English, then it will be fully transcribed and it will be available in your mailbox as a text mail.
Yeah, great.
So you can copy paste stuff from your voicemail.
So looking forward to new things, new features that are coming into Teams and into Teams calling specific. So a big thanks, Sven, for being here and telling us all about Teams calling, what it is, how we can use it, and how we can secure it. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Frans.
And thank you for being here, listening and joining us afterwards. In 2 weeks, on the 22nd of March, Victor Hedberg will join us in a webinar on temporary access pass, the key for unlocking passwordless. And our next live Ask Us Anything will be on April the 5th. For now, I say thank you all and see you next month in a new version of Live Ask Us Anything. Until then, bye-bye.